education needs to innovate to the point that we can really welcome the entire humanity of a student and see them as a whole, including creative intelligences and kinetic intelligences and all these different intelligences. We tend to focus more on the STEM fields, and which are valuable and important. But at the same time, I think there's a lot that we layer on top of a student to say, yeah, I know that you played piano in high school, but that really isn't relevant here.
Hello and welcome to the Future podcast series by UIN. I'm Madeline Arkins, Project Officer and your host for today. For this week's episode, I sat down with Robert Mark Morgan, award-winning educator, designer and creative advocate at Washington University in St. Louis, to explore why creativity belongs at the heart of modern education. From rethinking classroom spaces to breaking down the false dichotomy between intelligence and creativity, Rob shares how he helps students embrace failure and highlights creative intelligence as an essential skill for the future. I have the pleasure of speaking to Rob Mark Morgan today. For those who were able to join us at our summer conference earlier in June, they would have seen Rob and his presentation, for which he won Best Presentation for the Future of Universities category. And I myself didn't get to hear him speak, so that makes me all the more excited to dive into this topic today on the dichotomy of, the false dichotomy even, of intelligence and creativity. For the uninitiated, Rob is a multidisciplinary artist, designer, speaker, and professor at Washington University, where he's taught for over 14 years. He's also the author of The Art of Scenic Design, a practical guide to the creative process. He has designed across theater, film, museums, theme parks, and stained glass, so I'm told. And Rob's creativity call has been presented globally, urging educators and students to elevate and celebrate creative intelligences. Rob, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, and I'm a real honor to be joining you. This last conference was my first interaction with UIN at all, and I must say that award over my shoulder, I was flagged by TSA on the way home, so
No way.
they weren't quite sure what it was.
Wow, for
Yes.
just a wooden
Well,
award.
it's
Okay.
quite heavy, and yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe they thought it was something else, but
Yeah.
you know,
Also, the acronym UIIN also does garner a lot of questions. Also, like win, how to pronounce
yes,
it. So I'm sure
yes,
that also didn't win you
yes.
any favors. Maybe to get us stuck in, Rob. So from even your short bio, it's very evident that your career spans quite a number of different creative sectors. How did that evolve? And maybe can you tell us where the inspiration came to the shift of helping institutions rethink how to embed this kind of creativity in what they do?
Yeah, it was all serendipitous, as I think many innovations are. There's serendipitous sort of connections and catalysts for thinking about things in new ways. And I've always been involved in theater. I started out as a carpenter. I went to undergraduate school for theater, much to my mother's dismay. I went to undergraduate school, I got a drama degree, and I began teaching almost by accident when I was working at a theater in Denver. And from there, I've fallen in love for someone whose favorite movie is Dead Poet Society. I fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with trying to inspire students. As I like to say, my philosophy for teaching is 3 words: make hope visible. And I feel like that sort of says that I can't take you with me. I can't throw you on my back and take you to your destination, but I can try to get you there. But to be clear, I was at the University of Washington in Seattle.
That's
And
true.
then I switched the 2 words and moved to the Midwest, said goodbye to the water, and moved to the Midwest. And I'm out now at Washington University in St. Louis. It can be confusing even for me. But I've been at what we call WashU for short for about 15 years now. And some time ago, I happened to watch and was inspired by, you just never know where you might find inspiration, inspired by a documentary of all things by the late Sidney Pollack on Frank Gehry, one of my favorite architects. And in watching that, I was like, wow, Frank Gehry has the same anxieties, fears, uncertainties, failures as anyone else. We just know him by this spectacular international reputation as an architect. And so for me, that was a catalyst to think about what creativity is. And that just happened to coincide around a time where we had this very forward-thinking provost here at WashU named Holden Thorpe, who's since gone on to he is currently the editor-in-chief of the Science family of journals. And Holden recognized as a provost here that we had a lot of silos, as many institutions do, and he wanted faculty to talk across silos. And so he more or less funded proposals for what were affectionately called BYOIs, or bring your own ideas. And I wrote a proposal simply wanting to know how my colleagues in these different divisions, we have 8 total divisions. We have a new one actually in public health coming up. I wanted to know how people were creative. My colleagues were creative in different areas, in law and business and medicine, and you name it. I just wanted to know how they leveraged creativity. And that led to a very intimidating meeting around a very long, intimidating boardroom table. And it was fascinating. But I think one of the things that we came away thinking is we need to teach this, because we touched on all those things that the documentary touches on, and more. And we thought our students need to know that, for example, failure is a part of any process, that if you can just hurry up and fail, then you'll get to where you need to go. And so those BYOIs were what was later called the low-hanging fruit for a series of courses. There's a number of courses, I believe there's about a dozen now, that are called Beyond Boundaries courses. And they are first-year only courses that cut across all divisions and are taught by 2 or more faculty across 2 or more divisions. One I've taught now for 10 years is called Designing Creativity, and I teach it with my good friend and colleague Bruce Lindsay from architecture. And it's all about the creative process. We have guests who come in and talk about how they're creative in medicine and law and comedians and you name it. We have this wonderful comedian who talks about failure, about bombing on stage and how he gets past that. Jackie Joyner Kersey, an amazing Olympic gold medalist. We were audacious enough to ask her to talk about failure. And so that class really was one of the sort of poster children, you might say, for a program that I then was tapped to run for about 5 years called the Beyond Boundaries program. It's still going strong. And these classes are just, I think, in the sort of truest sense, are truly interdisciplinary. In fact, in many cases, I've had students say that they are the only classes that they take where they are sitting next to artists and business majors and you name it, engineering students and that type of thing. For me, that's the evolution of this work has been having the wonderful opportunity to teach a class on creativity and then trying to define what does that mean, So, and that's the BYOI is what gave rise to it. So that's been really my journey, my fascination, you might say, with the creative process of other people, no matter what their area is. And the class has come to be not only popular, but has given students this, I think, interesting way to look at their own creative intelligences as a secret sauce to whatever they might do later in life and while they're still students.
I particularly loved when I heard about this designing creativity class that you give students a certificate of failure. Is this
Yes.
at the beginning of the class or at the
Yeah,
end?
that's a great question. We do a lot. We do about 5 different sections. There's a section on design, on collaboration, on power, where you leverage your creative ideas and try to sell them to other students. And one section is on failure. Play and failure. In fact, we find there's a lot of play and failure and play. And my failure lecture, I dare say, has been famous over the years because it's all about, I have a poll everywhere on the screen when students walk in that say, if Rob fails at the failure lecture, does that mean he succeeded? And the questions are yes, no, and either way, it's Bruce's fault, my colleague's fault.
Nice.
And overwhelmingly, it's Bruce's fault. But yes, as they enter, I actually hand them a very silly little piece of paper that says a failure certificate, and that students have told me that they paste that or tape that to their desk. And when they're working and when they're feeling overwhelmed, if they bombed a quiz, they look at that and it more or less reaffirms this idea that, hey, you're gonna stumble, you're gonna fall, you just have to get back up and keep going. And so yeah, they each get a failure certificate. I talk about my own personal failures as part of the lecture, personal and professional failures. And so yeah, I actually look forward, interestingly enough, to doing the failure lecture every year.
It sounded like such a cool and personal way to bring everyone in on the
Yes.
topic. We've got some questions already, but I first want to get to the crux of
Yes.
this clarion, what you call the clarion call, creativity
Yes.
clarion call that challenges traditional educational norms.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? Why do you feel that this is a clarion call and is so important for right now? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please,
Yeah.
let's go from there.
Credit where credit's due. This is something Sir Ken Robinson, while he was alive, really was one of the more famous sort of testimonials on this topic. But it's become, I believe we're at an inflection point in history where AI is sort of really quite all over, really. And we keep debating how we use it as educators, how we might leverage it, how our students are using it. Is it cheating? Is it not? And quite honestly, I'm more interested in what AI cannot do. And there's also in my presentation, I talk quite a bit about a gentleman named Kai-Fu Lee. And Kai-Fu Lee, for 30 years, has been studying AI long before it was a catchphrase. And there are four things he describes as things AI cannot replace: dexterity, compassion, creativity, and collaboration. And I would add to that empathy. And so there are things that I believe I would like to elevate and celebrate, as I like to say, in our students that are their creative intelligences, things that may have been disregarded, maybe things that they thought was a dalliance, something that they did in high school that really isn't part of their mission right now as a student. They come, as we all know, students come to college with lots of boxes to check and a very kind of almost a tunnel vision. But I think it's important that students focus on the field and not the path. I often try to phrase it in that sense because when you're focused more on the field, you're open to serendipitous connections, just like I said with our provost Holden Thorpe, and having these things happen to you and realizing only in hindsight, wow, if I hadn't met that person, then that wouldn't have happened. So for me, it's all the more important, I think, to really focus now on what AI cannot do and leverage that. And one thing, John Cleese actually is quite famous for talking about creativity. And he talks about any AI can generate patterns. They can generate millions and millions of different pairings, but it's only intuition on the part of a human that can, as he says, find things that taste interesting, that seem to be interesting across two different things. And that's where innovation occurs. I like to also tout in the Beyond Boundaries program, I had a student who's now graduated named Logan, whose interests coming into WashU were in designing prosthetic limbs for children. So if you think about that, we often would say, we know that you've been told, been asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? We want to know what problems do you want to solve? And Logan's problem that they wanted to solve was helping kids who were amputees by designing prosthetic limbs. So if you think of that, at least at my university, that's child psychology, art, and mechanical engineering. And that's three different divisions. Those are the silos I was talking about. And so if you think of it, we don't make it very easy for someone like Logan to cut across those. And we aren't on that journey, that sort of lateral thinking, divergent thinking journey for Logan to say, hey, you might connect art and engineering here to make this prosthetic limb in that case. And so they've gone on to do amazing things. I'm very proud of them. But we are structurally, I think, at least as higher ed, we're structured in silos and deep analytical specializations, which is good. But we also need to focus on the horizontal part of the T. You can tell I'm Italian. I'm talking with my hands a lot.
I love that this is an audio medium,
It's an
but
audio medium, but
for
exactly.
those listening on the podcast later, lots of
I
hand
was
movements.
going back and forth horizontally. But anyway, it's just, I feel like we spend the rest of our lives specializing, that we need to offer students this opportunity to just be students and just find their interests and taste all the ice cream, as I like to say, and find out what combinations are best. You know, my wife might think chocolate and peanut butter is a good combination. I think that's disgusting. You know, it's the kind of thing that I think everybody has their combo of interests, and we are more than often than not generalists, I think, more than specialists in life.
And so much of the siloing rather, if that's a
Sure,
word,
it is now.
of modern education has to do, and you've talked about this, is them being rooted in the industrial age, that like a learning pathway is almost like a conveyor belt for
Yes.
students.
Yeah.
What do you think are maybe the most damaging assumptions, counterproductive assumptions that these current models make about students and learning
Yeah,
today?
that's an excellent question. I'm finding as I grow as an educator, again, I try to find inspiration where I might least find it. And I'll come back to your question, but I have to tell you, 2 years ago, my dad, he has prostate cancer, an aggressive form of prostate cancer, to the point that he had a tumor that was growing on his spine and he couldn't walk.
Oh dear.
And so he happens to be in Arizona. And I went there and he was being treated at the Mayo Clinic. And for those that don't know, the Mayo Clinic At least they saved his life, quite honestly, but they're also a non-traditional hospital. It's as if you tore down a hospital and rebuilt it around a single patient. And so any given day, I'd be sitting in his room with my mom, and specialists would come in, and you talk occupational therapists, physical therapists, palliative care, oncology, you name it. The social workers, even a pastor would come in. And so these folks would come in and they were treating him and they were talking to each other outside of his treatment about the best treatment for him.
Wow.
And it was at one point, a couple of social workers came in and I said, "Oh, he's sleeping right now. Could you come back later?" And they're like, "No, we're here for you." I'm like, "What?"
Oh,
And they said, "His success is dependent on your success, is it not?" I'm like, "Yes." So I use that analogy because at that moment I thought, what if higher ed was this way? So the sort of industrial age kind of model of education separates students by what Ken Robinson calls date of manufacture.
mm,
So, we put 5-year-olds together in a class and 10-year-olds together in a class. And any of the listeners who have kids who have crossed that threshold of a certain age know that 5-year-old child A is different than 5-year-old child B. And one might be their favorite. I'm not going to get into that. But, there's kind of thing that I feel like when we separate students like that and cluster them, we also layer on these expectations and metrics that, quite honestly, aren't really educating the whole student, in my opinion. There's a great study by a guy named George Land that I bring up in my talk about a divergent thinking study he designed for NASA. And that divergent thinking study, thankfully, after administering it to NASA scientists and finding about 2% were what they call creative genius level, it was a simple enough divergent thinking test that he administered it to 4 and 5-year-olds. And 98% of them were creative geniuses. And so, another theme of the creativity class is going back to our childhood, asking ourselves, what was it about us as kids that we truly enjoyed? And to quote Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's a Hungarian psychologist, when were we in flow? When did we lose track of time? And when did we forget to eat? Those kinds of things. What were we doing when we were really just immersed in an activity? And what he calls the flow channel. But I don't mean to get too into the weeds. The industrial age model of education, while efficient, I think now that we have AI to help us, what if AI was the gatekeeper, you might say, to a student that asks the student a series of questions, and then we kind of tailor or customize an education for students? If you think of it, students these days they live in an on-demand world. They can listen to whatever podcast they want, including this one, hopefully. They can watch anything they want, whenever they want. And this is a far cry from what I experienced as a kid myself, as a young person. And so I feel like education needs to innovate to the point that we can really welcome the entire humanity of a student and see them as a whole, and including creative intelligences and kinetic intelligences and all these different intelligences. We tend to focus more on the STEM fields, and which are valuable and important. But at the same time, I think there's a lot that we layer on top of a student to say, yeah, I know that you played piano in high school, but that really isn't relevant here. So
yeah.
whether we explicitly say that or not, that's the message they're getting.
Do you want to be a part of a global community where universities, businesses, and public organizations come together to solve the world's biggest challenges? At UIIN, we equip our members with the skills, tools, and strategies they need to create impactful partnerships that drive real-world change. Whether it's upskilling your team, strengthening your institution's partnership efforts, or becoming more entrepreneurial, UIIN empowers you with the knowledge and support you need. Join us today. Visit uiin.org to find the best plan for your organization.
I found that divergent thinking study that you were talking about, I found that very emotional to hear that there's so much of this creative potential when you're younger, and then it is just at
Yeah.
a loss when you leave that phase of life. And similarly, when you mentioned in this talk that in the USA at least, and I'm certain that this follows a similar pattern in other countries, that the US spends twice as much on incarceration than education.
Yes.
And when you think of all of that creative
Yeah.
potential and opportunity for breaking these silos,
Yeah.
it's just
And
really
students are
untapped.
more medicated than they've ever been as well. One of my favorite inspirational kind of go-tos is Will I Am, of all people. And I mean, he has some really profound things he's said. One of my favorite photographers is a guy named Norman Seeff, and Norman Seeff did some interviews of Will I Am. And he talks about if I had grown up in a different time, I would have been medicated for what he calls a cup. He said, I am a cup, and I am constantly taking in creative input. And unless I do something with it, I break myself, I break the cup.
Mm.
And I think it's important for us to recognize that, sometimes students are more audio listeners and learners. One of the things I offer in my creativity class is they can read something that I post, but they can also listen to me read it in their ear holes. If I record it as a
If we're going to
podcast.
use the scientific term,
The
ear
ear
holes.
holes, yes, yes. That's and so and in a way, I want to embrace that that's happening. There's a
Yeah,
famous, if you don't mind me taking another tangent,
please.
there's a famous choreographer named Gillian Lynn, who, when she was a child, was quite disruptive in school. And her mother was concerned and took her to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist sat down with the two of them and then asked if he and her mom could leave the room. And they watched her from the window of the door. And he said, Mrs. Lynn, I have something to tell you. Your daughter is a dancer. And from then on, her mother took her to gymnastics classes, dance classes, and she found her element. Ken Robinson describes or defines finding your element as a combination of natural aptitude and personal passion. And so Gillian Lynn found her element. She would have been medicated if it was 20 years later.
Yeah.
But at the time, she became a world famous choreographer for musicals. We were talking about musicals before we came on air. We're
Yes,
talking a world famous choreographer because thankfully, she had a doctor that said, here's the deal. Your daughter's a dancer.
yeah.
And that's
And
not something we should treat.
no, and I think this is also the whole systems element of it that plays a role.
Absolutely.
I'm conscious of time, and I want to
Yes.
answer or get to this one question that Keith has asked. Keith asks, bombing on stage, learning from failure. So, how do you scaffold learning for failure so that creativity sits at the heart of the search for solutions or new ways of thinking?
That's a great question. Teaching failure can be quite interesting. The every section, including the failure play section, has a group project. And these group projects, and this is a class of 80 first-year students, and we have 4 undergraduate TAs. It's a massive class. And so these students are clustered in groups of anywhere from 3 to 8. And I believe it's a group of 5. We put them in for the failure play section, and we have them videotape. I know that's a dated term now. We have them record. We have them record Rube Goldberg machines. So they are tasked with a series of 7 steps. The first step is the initial push of an object, and the 7th step has to water a plant or turn off a light or whatever it might be that they choose. And then in that project, they get used to failure. We've had students say, yeah, ran this thing 40 times before it actually did what it was supposed to do. And so we try to acclimate them in that particular section to getting used to failure. And in something like that is very iterative and has to be quick, they're like, okay, yeah, this time we turn the book 90 degrees than it was before, and maybe that'll work, and the ping pong ball will bounce where it's supposed to. And that's getting them used to failure. I think that project lends itself to exactly that. And then hopefully they take that into their other studies, into the rest of their 3.5 years of college and beyond to say, okay, that didn't work. No big deal. Let's move on.
Something about that also sounds very similar to turning away from the instant gratification that we've become so used to,
Yes,
and building
absolutely.
in delayed gratification and how we fail and continue to fail in life.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, yeah. It's a remarkable class. In the lecture I talked about, we all have lots of professional failures that we're willing to share. I had a terrible review for a design I did for a theater piece some years ago that I share with students, but I also share a personal one. And after I won't go into it now, but after I do it, I share with them a piece of pottery, a picture of Kintsugi pottery, which is where you fill in the cracks with gold. And I say, look, we all have cracks. And I think failure, if it's an effective failure, we learn from it and we fill in the crack that was that failure with gold. And we make ourselves stronger and better and more resilient as we move forward.
there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in for all the Leonard Cohen fans out there.
Yes.
That's what that reminds me of.
One of my favorite Leonard Cohen quotes is, "If I knew where the good songs came from, I'd go there more often."
I like it. I like it. Rob, we have a few more minutes left. I see one more question
Okay.
from our lovely colleague Despina. As
Despina, hello, Despina.
she says, "Thank you so much for this, Robert. So inspiring, leaning into your insights. I'm curious to everything that STEM or that educators can take away and apply in their classroom, whether it's STEM or arts, although this split is artificial, as you mentioned. So the
Yeah.
question is, if the classroom is a theatrical stage background and you as the educator, you're the designer, what would you place there to get the attention of the students or the audience in this example and keep them engaged in the learning journey?"
Wow, that's a great question. I once had a student group, and I promised to get to your question, Despina. I once had a student group propose to me and show me their typical circadian rhythms, and they pointed at this low part of the circadian rhythm, and there was an arrow that says "your class." Like it's taught at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I find that at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, post lunch, students get a little sleepy and I have to engage them. Going back to the failure lecture, I do a great little exercise called the Wheel of Misfortune. There's a famous game show called the Wheel of Fortune. And I share with them famous, or should I say, failures by famous people. And they have to guess who the famous person was. And so I guess the underlying point is we know Oprah because she's freaking Oprah, but we don't know that Oprah was told that she couldn't be on television, that she was terrible at TV. Now she's Oprah. But in a sense, I feel like that's how I try to teach, is a way that's engaging and that is much like design is bouncing between imagination and craft. I feel like while during a lecture, it can't be too long of a lecture, and then I have to do the craft part with them. And it's both practice and study, practice and study. It's almost like a pendulum swinging back and forth. The other thing I wish I could do if I could wave a magic wand is offer an opportunity for every student when they come to college, no matter where they're going to college, to just be a student, just in the purest sense of the word, that they are not pre-identifying majors and minors and they're not assigned to an undergraduate division in a certain area. And it's just, wouldn't it be great if, I mean, that's the sort of crucible of space that you need to taste all the ice cream and offer an opportunity for a student to just explore for exploration's sake. I'm not sure. Despina did a great presentation, by the way, at the conference. And so
She did.
shout out to Despina as
Shout
well.
out Despina and STEM education.
I hope
Rob,
I answered Despina's question, and if I didn't, now I'm scared.
she's wrathful, as we all know.
Yes, of course.
Rob, I wonder if I could ask you one last question.
Of course, I'm at your disposal.
Okay, fabulous. I'm curious if there's one small step that, if there's any educators listening, what's one small step they could take tomorrow to make their classroom a more creative space?
Yes.
I feel like maybe you've touched on this already, but like,
Yeah, this is a great question. There's a guy named Tim Brown who is a co-founder of IDEO here in the States, and he does this great lecture and talks about how when we were kids, when we were in kindergarten, we had all these wonderful creative materials. We had construction paper and crayons and pipe cleaners and popsicle sticks. And those gradually are taken away from us as we get older, including in higher ed. There's a Post-it note is maybe the most creative thing we have in the room. And so IDEO employs this idea of prototyping carts. And they're just a little rolling cart that has all those great things in it that you had when you were in kindergarten. And sometimes you need to think with your hands, as many designers, as myself as a carpenter as well, piecing things together to make them look from 20 feet away, look like they're supposed to be what they are on stage. And having a prototyping cart and just rearranging what's available to play around with objects and prototype an idea. One of the things I ask students is how long it took for Google Glasses to be prototyped. And some people say weeks, days. It actually took 45 minutes. It was 45 minutes to prototype Google Glasses. And so that's the kind of thing, we shouldn't be removing these tools away from people. I also would add to sort of my industry friends as well, and also academic friends, that even the space itself, myself as a designer, even the space itself, I mentioned the long, intimidating table when we pitched Bring Your Own Idea. There's this long Hudsucker proxy length table, right? And it's intimidating, and it also presupposes that the person sitting at the end of the table has all the ideas and is the arbiter of good and bad ideas. And just changing the table, if you think of it, is a game changer for a classroom. If you seat your students in a circle as opposed to this hierarchical kind of way, speaking directly to them from a podium, it changes the dynamic. So those are a couple of ideas of how you might just change your classroom. Go back to when you were a kid.
Yeah, I mean, that would really be the ideal, wouldn't it?
Yes, wouldn't we should spend the rest of the day. But one of the things I do, and I didn't do this in the presentation, was have participants take a adult resignation. And that sets the table for them to think just crazy ideas sometimes can be innovative ones if you think about it. Every innovative idea began as potentially a nutty one, crazy one.
Rob, I've taken more of your time than I intended, but it has been a joy to have a little chat with you.
It's been a pleasure and an honor, quite honestly. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. We love to hear it. And Rob, where can people find you if they want to get in touch, find out more about you?
Yeah, the best way is I guess I've taken this to the point that I thought I should make a website. So I've designed a website called creativitycall.com. And that website is at the very bottom. You can reach me any number of ways. And I look forward to chatting more. I love speaking either virtually or in person to not just students, but to colleagues, to professors. I think it's an important clarion call to kind of come full circle, that we really think about how we elevate and celebrate creative intelligences in our students.
Absolutely. And as someone who has just done some sleuthing in the website, I really encourage people to go check out Rob's lectures and workshops, because they are a feast for everything. They're so enriching.
Thank you.
So
thanks
for your time, Rob. And
thank you. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, everyone else. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice to help others find this content too.